Hi, how are you? Welcome. Thank you for spending some time. Um, Hopefully more time with you than just me on YouTube. Um, Happy full moon. Um, Full moon in Aquarius proper. Uh, Righteously so. Um, Happy super moon, happy blue moon. One of a kind, or one out of uh, three or four of a kind. It feels kind of like we're playing poker. Um, and there's something at the end of the river. Um, take that, take that, and spin on it. Why don't you? Um, One of a kind, of three of a kind, of four of a kind for quite a long while. Actually, and following some very intense energies and very much doing their own thing. There's Neptune retrograde, there's Saturn retrograde, there's Pluto retrograde, there's Mercury retrograde. Mercury, fairly new. Um, there's Eris retrograde, there's other planetary bodies retrograde, absolutely. But we're gonna focus on a few of those. And gosh, I love how I'm already like overheating. A few of those. It does feel like, at least because the moon's very much involved in this triangulation, that it's also not really. Um, Mercury, Saturn, and Neptune are very much playing around, right? And I do feel like it's an opening and investigating stature of connection that they all have. Um, like it is giving me very much sort of like open stretching and like discovering new elements of the body kind of thing. Um, I think the moon being slightly behind that is an inverse reflection of it, which is kind of a lot like funhouse mirrors. So put two mirrors like at 90 degrees or something, and it creates an inverted reflection of what is going on. Cameras can do this. If you do any kind of uh, uh, live camera work, you can opt to like reverse the cameras or mirror the cameras as well. Um, and that's not to say that it's purely like funhouse mirrors or fragmented versions of. It's not so much halves to the whole. I do think that's what a lot of society is taking it as. And there will be sort of more latching on with relationships, or inquisition into relationships, but we're very much piecing things together, not a half to the whole, but a many faceted image, many pieces to the puzzle, if you will. Uh, More like a stained glass than a funhouse mirror obfuscation. Um, I do think that triangulation and those energies involved with the moon will also lend itself to, and because Venus is in Virgo, will lead to some speculation and active balancing within how hyper reactive that can be. Think balancing versus hyperfixation, or balancing versus hyper extension. And that's not even just physically in movement. Like, we extend ourselves quite a bit emotionally or what have you, just in being social. A lot of times that can feel like a chore. And I do think that it's calling to balance in that as well. How do we hyperextend ourselves in those situations that take away our curiosity in that movement, or and that create a little bit more pain perhaps than we want. Or is that what we've become used to, because we do have Eris retrograde and Chiron in Aries together still. um, so I do think that that also makes me think hyperextension that can tear something. Um, and even in an emotional sense, overextending ourselves can also tether us to something else rather than ourselves, and sort of tear us away from ourselves. So bear with me as I jump back and forth between this being a very visceral movement, and also a very vivid introspection. Both are true, both can be true. Maybe you're leaning more toward one than the other, but I think even in a very literal physical movement, often we can find more strength and flexibility, and vice versa. Um, and that can come with maybe not pigeonholing ourselves to one thing, or not feeling like, or attributing weight to the failure or success of any one thing. Ooh, I love how I just rushed into that. Um, Sometimes you can put a thing down not because you're useless, but because you are needed elsewhere, because your attention is necessary elsewhere. I think I see this a lot in many aspects. Um, One, micro, like the idea of like stopping a task and starting a new one, be it cleaning because that's just how you help yourself get things done, or being it like, starting, stopping a painting and starting a new painting, or what have you, whatever creative project. That can feel like a negligence or a failure when in fact, uh, perhaps that's just the moment that this painting needs rest, and perhaps this new idea needs to be purged out, and breathed life into it before it dissipates, or before you can no longer resuscitate the idea, because the memory itself is far off, which very much makes those things feel very alive, uh, which is fun if you want it to be, which can be fun if you want it to be. Um, and conversely, in a more so macro setting, um, I think when something you're used to doing is suddenly not asked of you, it can feel like I'm useless, I'm not necessary, I'm not needed, I'm being replaced. Um, and in actuality, it may be the way uh, other pieces of the puzzle are begging you to look in other directions, or begging you to allow your attention to be useful elsewhere. And sometimes it feels like that's less responsibility, but you're actually being elevated in a responsibility to mitigate the little things, the fine-tuned things that almost became second nature to you, um, which is a success dressed as a failure, really. Um, if you really want to still put those names on it. Um, in general, I think we can pigeonhole or attach ourselves too much to one thing or another. And again, this Mercury, Saturn, Neptune is begging for a little bit more openness and investigation into these things, and curiosity and playfulness, openness to the experience rather than hyperfixating on any one aspect of it or skill. This is so funny, how relevant this is. Um, um, I do think Mars and Jupiter and Gemini, um, they're very much like so close that they're dry humping each other. Um, Maybe feeding their own ego, or playing their own tiny violin. I feel like Mars in Gemini struggles a bit. Um, I feel like it can be very hard on itself, which is again sort of that mental energy and where we attach, success or failure, whatever, whatever. Um, and maybe an expectation because that's more air and thought, and that's less tangible than maybe what Mars desires. Uh, and so I think where we feel like taking breaks can be failure, we have to remind ourselves that there's actually strength in that flexibility. There's strength in that ability to pivot. That in and of itself is a skill that sort of weaves all of these things together and cradles every jointed decision, kind of like cartilage in a joint, right? Um, and so we can, overexert with strength, or we can pay very good attention to, very mindful attention to, joints and alignment, and nerve flossing and all of those things. Again, back and forth with these literal cues. Um, Da, 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 da. It's very funny that that is coming up too, actually, because there's actually a ton of really interesting research about injury improvement in like knee and hip and ankle joints, for things like Tai Chi versus, very focused, and very diligent and very directed physical therapy. Ironic, isn't it? Um, how that can inform healing in many ways. After all, that's what I'm here to do. Let's see. Da, 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 da. Where taking breaks feels like failure. Remind yourself that there is strength to be found in flexibility. There are great gains where we least expect, and maybe most ignored. And that's very important because I feel like sometimes just because it hasn't triggered you doesn't necessarily mean that we've healed it fully. Um, when it comes to like injury diagnosis or what have you, a lot of times it's nerve points and what have you in opposite directions or in other places of the body. But a lot of times, even emotional triggers, it's in some folded up note that we forgot about, tucked in a box, swept under the bed, buried in dust. Um, and there are great games to be had going into investigating those spaces and sort of cleaning out skeletons from our closet in those ways. It does not seem like rewarding work. It doesn't sound like rewarding work. But there's greater gains than can be predicted. There's greater gains than can just be seen. And that I think is really hard for Mars to hear. And is maybe not what Gemini wants to hear, which would make the pitfall there, I think, falling into a loop of starting and stopping new things in sort of like a vicious cycle. And telling yourself you'll come back to it and telling yourself that, it's not avoidance, it's actually that I'm just so inspired to start this new idea. This is where your intellect and your intuition will come very much in handy. And just the way that your body feels about it. Um, you don't have to pathologize everything, but honor every decision, and honor every question, and honor the way that your body feels about those questions and those decisions in that moment. Um, and that may lead you in some new directions and some surprising directions, and surprising realizations even. Uh, and sometimes they're not easy or kind right off the bat, but we sift through those things so that we can find a deeper connection and kindness with ourselves, right? Ideally. Um, da, 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 da. Yeah. Great games where we least expect or maybe most ignored. With that being said, let's pull some cards. And I opted for my tradish because I feel like everything, like I said in the beginning, something at the end of the river, like we're playing poker. I feel like I don't need to stir up anything with numbers, or with numbers just outright, or numbers raw. Um, because I do feel like that plays with time and in a very real way, and I don't think we need that. Not at this particular moment. We'll do it later, in a little bit. A little bit. Bear with me. Ha, ha, ha. Am I the only one that every time it's a blue moon or a new moon, I hear the Elvis Presley song in my head, crooning? you go. Love that. Eat it. Yeah. Much like we are hanging out, and I'm pulling some cards for you, wherever you are. Maybe I'm sitting on your dresser or on your dashboard. And there's cards in between us. We'll take 3 deep breaths. Big inhale. And then on that exhale, imagine a shadow card coming to you. And pay attention to whatever arises for you. Tapping into that helps me pull what I need out. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Ooh, okay. Yeah, I think first off, we require patience, and a little kindness with ourselves. A lot of us were yelled at as children and called stupid for silly reasons. So rewire that, because I feel like that still exists in the expectations that we have of ourselves or in growth or anything. I feel like that tough love that we think we give ourselves sometimes is a little bit more of a remake of love that we didn't want to receive in the first place. But maybe that's the only thing we knew how, right? Or knew how to do. That was the only example we were given. But now is the time to learn how to rewire some stuff. Think of the exact opposite, like your most profound exact opposite, the thing that made you feel most the opposite, or most of the thing that you want to feel, and sort of paragon that, and create a new identity with that, or new leaning toward of synapse in your brain so that it facilitates that reaction a little bit better. Um, because I do feel, what did I feel? I felt like there was a lot of expectation, not necessarily not necessarily even that you know what to do with it or how to do anything with it, just that you want it, just that you need it, just that. And I feel like, oh, that's not a fun feeling. Um, it's a very, and like, no judgment. Ideally, no judgment. Let me not even judge how icky that feels. Um, because there's absolutely still ways in which I do that to myself. So no judgment of that, but also that comes from judging self. Um, and we cannot judge ourselves as we move and learn and play, because that ultimately creates fear response in these fear responses in our brain, in our bodies, in our movement, that will pigeonhole you, will constrict you, will inhibit you, um, will make you move more like a fucking broken Rubik's cube than like in any kind of flow state. Um, and it hurts. Um, Knight of Cups inverted. Be a ton kinder to yourself about it. Um, there's just so much more space. There's so much more freedom. There's so much more stillness. There's so much more silence. The Page of Wands stands above this, right? And he's very much just kind of like letting the fire come to him. And that's maybe how we have to think more of the laws of rhythm in life. Not that we're, you know, constantly creating, or, productively creating towards circumstances, but that we are the circumstances. And so we remove the barriers in that knowledge of any of those things that we want to us. Ease, ultimately. That's why they give you an epidural in birth, because they want all of your muscles to be easy, want all your pain receptors to be easy. Um, that is not to say that it's the only thing that can make you feel that way, because I have heard some wild stories, some really beautiful stories, actually. Um, and I hope I get to learn more about those stories. But I digress. Um, it's not necessarily coddling either. I feel like it's we don't have to coddle ourselves. We respond to the vibe that we put out. Like if you were to view yourself, your wounded self, the self of you that judges you, as a wounded animal, as a wounded stray, how would you have to behave or move so that that stray wouldn't run from you? And this is very much what our demons do. Although they're not running, um, or they're not running from us, they're begging for us to look for them and to listen. Which is also why I don't subscribe to evil, because they're not chasing. We are the runners. Um, I digress again. Um, the Page of Wands with this flame too, like nothing bends this, nothing moves this. This is like pure intention, but this is also like no fear and ease and stillness. Like even the wind can't bend this flame, because it's so potent, so focused, and again, not hyper focused, but when you just become at ease with it, you can bend with the flame, and then nothing seems like it's bending, does it? Uh, Adaptability, and that makes everything seem like it's moving quite smooth and quite perfect, don't you think? I think that's often the illusion of shows. We don't hear when our favorite drummer messes up, because they make it look so mesmerizing. We don't notice the slight changes in, Broadway, because it's just such a part of the moment that it could very well have been scripted. Those are our favorite parts of any show, or comedy shows or what have you. The many reels of uh, unscripted scenes. Um, the Page of Wands and the Knight of Cups are reflections of that safety in space, so that you can expand beyond. If this is centered, if this is stable, if this is safe, if this feels safe, if you feel safe, if you feel free of judgment, especially from yourself, then you are free to expand. The Queen of Pentacles in the beginning of this is also inverted, which is, I think, the ways in which we limit ourselves, the ways in which we constrict our movement for fear of embarrassment or fear of failure, or fear of looking stupid, whatever it is. Um, they say that about dancing. Like if you look like you're trying to hold back, you're going to look awkward, which is the fear, fear of looking silly. But you're making yourself look silly. Um, the Queen of Pentacles needs to be reminded not to be afraid while they move, and that in and of itself reverses right side ups this card, right? So that in that so that expansion can finally happen. So in that centeredness, expansion can finally happen. And in ways that are full of gains and full of growth that we do see and believe and feel and acknowledge, and all of these things. It's I said something. It said patience in the beginning. It's kind of like patience of gains, like nothing happens all at once, and it takes a minute to see progress on your journey. You feel it much before, like much sooner than you see it. And I think that can feel a little like you're going batty sometimes, depending on what it is. Um, And in those moments, this King of Wands, when that expansion goes a little bit farther, you reel it back in, uh, with assurance. You don't let it run away from you. You're not reeling it back in to hinder your progress. You're reeling it back in so that your progress doesn't run away with you and you lose your fucking mind. It's quality control. He's kind of like a floor manager, I think. Uh, quality control. Um, but also acknowledges the boundaries of safe space. He'll be the one to remind you. This will be the one to remind you, like, pull back just a little bit, so that you don't hurt yourself because you'll be able to go farther tomorrow. Um, like any good inner monologue that's like, uh, what do they say with stretching? Like, if you're stretching and it hurts, dial back and stay there. And then the next time where you were initially, you'll be able to dial up to or dial to and then dial more, dial back. Um, and that this King of Wands is very much serves as that mechanism. Um, so on the outskirts of your inner central acknowledgement and stability, I feel like kind of like an ego death, honestly. This is where we, I guess, and again, in non-judgment, view our shadows with love. This is where we see, oof, ooh, this is where we see our demons. And we have the opportunity to either be paralyzed with fear or uh, understand what it is that this demon is asking of us, this entity, whatever it is. This negativity, this opportunity to cut a cord or cut a tie or opportunity to change. All of that very much sounds like that moment in between this reality and dream reality in astral projection, or what a lot of people find themselves in sleep paralysis. It's kind of like your own mind's trigger to like stop you from leaving your body. In the same way that when you hold your breath, your brain will trigger much sooner than is actually necessary, um, or than is actually like fatal. Not necessary, but is much sooner than is actually fatal, like that you need air. When it comes to breath work, that like first moment of like, oh, do I have enough air? I can't breathe. Um, is the brain's panic response, and then after you calm through that, you surprise yourself with the length that you can actually hold your breath. The same thing applies to astral projection. This is where a lot of people find themselves caught in sleep paralysis, right? Um, because it's their brain's natural trigger, like hold on, don't, I can't breathe. Um, all of this to say, I had an interesting moment in my own astral projection journey. Um, that was actually quite terrifying. um, I pretty much had like a very like me version of the Exorcist girl, like on the edge of my like bed or couch. I was out here, on the edge of my couch, watching me sort of like hesitate, I guess, and got really close to my face and was like very disjointed and very much like propped, and was kind of mocking me and was like, don't you love this? Like, isn't this what you always say you love, what you always say, and like you aren't afraid of? But I could feel the fear response in my body, right? um and intellectually, I kind of went through this journey of like, am I actually just a big softie and I am afraid of these things? Part of that is true. Am I actually just, this or that or blah blah blah? Um, and all of these thoughts paralyzed my body, while this entity taunted me, right? Uh, and sort of laughed at me very menacingly about it until I stopped judging the experience and I stopped pathologizing the experience and I stopped intellectualizing the experience and I responded opposite, I guess. Um, and I responded very tenderly to this menacing thing and was like, why are you trying to scare me? I know that's not what you want. I know that this is just to push me away because you actually really want to be held. And this entity 100% like broke down, turned into this like sobbing little girl and just kind of like coddled up against me. Um and then we both, I guess, dreamed together. Uh it was a very interesting, very visceral moment. Where I also got called of my own shit and I got to call that shit on its shit right back. Um and see things ultimately change for the best. Um and that's not to say that that is an easy choice um or an easy task, but I don't think it's an impossible one just because it's not easy. Um in fact, I think quite possible. And that is again where this central faith and tenderness to our own wounds allows us to uh, expand, um, so readily and so wildly and so wonderfully. Uh, and so I think that that is perhaps maybe where I leave you. Um, like I said, we don't need to rush the numbers. Take some time with yourself. Take some patience. I've given you a little aside to digest. I hope that story didn't spook you too much. And give me like little chills again, but in a really good way. In a very refreshing way, like in a beach breeze kind of way. Um, so I hope it brings you that as well. And I hope you can find that if you yourself are suffering with night terrors, um, or sleep paralysis in any way, or nightmares. Um, yeah, I'll leave that with you. I'll leave that with you. Sorry, I'm just making sure there's nothing little bits that I wanted to add. Um, yeah, we'll leave it there. May you find safety and ease under the stars tonight. Wonderfully so.